I'm here today with Carol Smeja, the founder of the original Mine Pet Platter, an upgraded dog food feeder designed to allow pets to eat as nature intended. The original Mine Pet Platter was the winner of the 2016 and 2017 Family Choice Award and has been featured in Pet Business Magazine, Pet Product News, Pet Age, and Dogster Magazine. Carol has a background in psychology and the social dynamics of eating and has worked with the USDA and the Center for Disease Control to improve the health and diets of Americans, humans, that is. She then moved on to study animal eating behaviors and is now focused on teaching pet parents that how you feed your dog is just as important as what you feed. You can learn more about Carol and the original Mine Pet Platter at Mine Pet Platter at minepetplatter.com. And also it can be found in 164 stores nationwide, with that number quickly growing. So Carol, welcome.
Thank you so much, Tim. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, so why don't you fill in anything that I may have missed in that intro, and we'll get right into your story.
Okay, well, I think you did a fabulous job. Thank you. As we've talked about, my background is in psychology, and I spent a good deal of years within the food industry trying to understand the dynamics of how people eat, how they make their food choices, how they report their food choices. And at one point in time, we also came up with the notion of nutritional schizophrenia, which was people say they eat one thing, but then what they actually do is entirely different. And there's so many psychological factors that go into eating. And all I did was to basically take that understanding and learn how to apply different principles in understanding the eating dynamics of dogs. And it's been an interesting journey for me. The whole point of the origin of the Pet Platter was we have a little 14-pound Havanese who would consume her food so incredibly fast. She would let out a belch that was so loud, we could no longer feed her while we had guests over for dinner. They would just have tears strolling down their eyes, just down their cheeks. Oh my God, what was that? So one day I was making chicken for Pip, the name of our dog, and I was cutting it on a cutting board, and my daughter said, "Don't throw the juices and everything away, give it to Pip." So I put it down on the floor, and for the next 15 minutes, I saw her totally engaged and sniffing and moving around, and all of a sudden a complete dramatic change in eating behavior. So I told my husband about it, and we have always been big time pet lovers, and we said, there is something to this. So I went back and studied how wolves and mountain lions eat in the wild. They are fascinating creatures. I observed all of their hunts, how they deconstruct carcasses, how they eat various types of food within the carcass. And after observing all this behavior, we realized the bowl is actually counterproductive to healthy, natural eating. It actually inhibits the instinctive eating behaviors of pets. So after studying that for a year, my husband, who was a product designer, spent a year developing the concept because it had to be simple enough that we could design and market it to pet parents. And then we spent another year looking for the material because we were committed that this product had to 100% benefit the health and well-being of our pets. So we were actually in development for almost 4 years, and we were very proud to finally come out with it.
Wow. Well, congratulations on that. And man, I was, we obviously, I saw your speech at the Raw and Natural Dog Summit, and it was one of my favorite talks. It's just almost like mind blown. It's like one of those ideas that is just so simple, and it just kind of hits you upside the head. And, often those simple ideas like that are so powerful, and it just makes so much sense of what an impact it could have on a dog's health. So thank you for your work in bringing this product to life.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. And you know what? It's really interesting because the only thing we did was to take a look at feeding from a dog's perspective, from their world. And like you said, some of the simplest ideas can have the biggest impact.
Yeah. So people listening, they're on their commute or they're doing the dishes, and they don't have the privilege of watching the video right now, which, we'll eventually put on YouTube. Can you hold up the platter and then just kind of give a physical description of what it looks like? And I know people are going to want to go to your website, again, minepetplatter.com.
Okay, here's an actual picture of the platter. And I'm going to make this even a little bit easier by showing one without a label. That would help. And the whole point behind the Pet Platter is that it allows 360-degree view and movement. So the pet does not have to worry that somebody's coming in to take their food at all, because when they're blinded by the sides of the bowl, it can increase anxiety and food guarding, and it takes away from that natural feeding experience. The other thing is that you can spread the food all over the platter in these little scoops and in the ridges. And the point behind that is simply that the bowl contains the food in a small pile. And what that leads to is that the pet actually just gulps down on the pile and takes in too much food as well as air. That coagulates going down, hits the stomach, and causes bloat. So by spreading the food all around, they're able to take up smaller pieces. The mucus in their esophagus can wrap around it, allows for easy transport down to the stomach, and provides actually healthy digestion. So if you have a dog that suffers from burping, regurgitation, and gas, this platter will actually decrease those problems. The other important notion is that the little scoops here resemble the ends of bones, and it promotes licking, and licking releases positive endorphins in their brain, which is calming and rewarding and relaxing. So the more that they're licking, that also creates a more natural and positive feeding experience as well. And those are some of the key highlights of it. The other thing I'd like to mention, though, is when you feed from a bowl, all the food is contained in a pile. It doesn't allow the dog to really interact and explore the food. And in the wild, they would use their nose in terms of sniffing what they wanted to eat. In fact, their nose is 100,000 times more powerful than ours. They have close to 300 million olfactory receptors compared to our 6 million. So they see the world through their nose, and by spreading that food out, you're allowing them to use their strongest sense in terms of selecting the foods that they want to eat.
Got it. Yeah, and to paint a visual picture for those listening, basically the platter is like a cutting board with curved edges, kind of resembles like a big kind of chubby bone, but think of a big cutting board, and like you described there in the middle are basically a series of rows. It looked like maybe about 40 or 50 or so in total little dimples that are impressed into which, as you described, food can get in there, and that encourages and motivates and really requires the dog to lick, as you said.
And the interesting thing is we had this tested at a number of different veterinary medicine schools. And what they shared with us is that the platter is adopted as the pet's carcass. There's sort of this innate feeling that this becomes their platter, which is why we call it the Mine Pet Platter. the dogs are reclaiming their feeding territory the way they like to eat.
Right.
So they'll sleep by it, they'll put their paw on it, they visit it during, excuse me, they visit it during the day, and it really becomes a part of their life that they cherish.
Wow. It's like the blanket of the kid in Peanuts. He's always walking around with his blanket. I can't remember the guy's name, but
that's a great analogy. I love that one, Tim.
So yeah, I mean, this just makes so much sense, because you're taking me back to when I used to feed Sonny, and Sonny was my dog, and so I fed him 99% of the time, and it was just one of these regular old bowls, and I would remember I would put it right up against the sliding glass in our backyard, and so right away, he's basically contained, and his back is to the backyard, the environment, right? And it would be interesting now that I would remember he'd kind of be eating and like looking out the corner of his eyes, and I had to be careful not to go outside while he was eating, because he would actually growl if I got too close. And so if I were doing this again, I would have put this platter out more in the center of the patio area on the ground, which would allow him, full ability to move around and feel comfortable and secure, instead of just wolfing this down as fast as he could.
You know what, you brought up a really important point, and this is something we can really help your listeners with. When you think about it, most of us, and I'm guilty of this as well, I would take the bowl and have it in a corner in the kitchen. So two things are occurring. The first is that you're asking them to put their face into a hole, which blocks their vision. They actually have no peripheral vision whatsoever. So that immediately targets their survival instinct, like, I don't know if somebody's going to come in and hurt me or steal my food. But then at the same time, their second most powerful sense is their ears. They can hear up to 10 miles away, and the frequency levels that they hear are much different than we are. So when they're in a corner like that, they're blinded, and they have all these sounds coming in that we're not capable of hearing, which have to create a very anxiety-ridden situation. So by pulling that away and allowing them to hear and see all around is critical to a natural eating experience.
Yeah, and let's try to paint a picture of. I mean, you show this powerful video that really gets to the core of the foundational issue here, which is setting an environment for a dog that it is it's embedded in its genetic code and its behavior over tens of thousands of years, which obviously most closely comes from wolves. And so you showed this video of a wolf eating a rabbit, and a couple of its pack mates were around. Can you just paint the picture of the video and kind of what your takeaways are from that, and how it informed and how it's reflected in the platter?
Sure. The wolf was fed a rabbit, which is highly prized protein among wolves. And in this, all of the other pack wolves are watching this one wolf have this rabbit, and all of a sudden you start to see them circling around and coming in from different angles. And the wolf is actually spinning and sort of fending off the other wolves. And it sort of ends where he's lying on the rabbit and rolling on it on his back, claiming this as his own prey and carcass and nobody else's. And it's much like when you have a dog and you see them rolling in the ground on their back, they are trying to pick up a scent and use that as a form of communication. So it's really interesting. But the wolf, the powerful thing about the video is this wolf was spinning around 3 and 4 times in all different directions, and even fended off the mother, which I found really interesting. It's like, Mom, you're not going to have any of this either.
Yeah, and then they're pretty mangy, skinny wolves. They seem like they could have used some more calories in their diet. So he or she was pretty protective of that rabbit. So back to the platter. Have you heard any stories of dogs actually rolling around on the platter as they kind of claim it from customers?
I haven't heard that. I have heard of them laying by it, sleeping by it, hiding it. A couple of people who attended the summit, they said they were looking for the platter and they couldn't find it, and it went to a favorite place
Oh, wow.
where the dog hid his favorite things.
It was Dan.
So yeah, it was pretty funny. But we haven't had any role in it, but what they will do is put their paw on it or move it to the side to position it, much like they ate in the wild. Another video that I showed at the summit was a dog actually eating a fish and using his paws to manipulate the fish so that he could eat the portions that he wanted.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to keep in mind that 95% of the time of wolves was spent hunting, scavenging, sniffing, eating. Their whole lives were dominated by food. Even with our own dogs, they're hunting and sniffing most of the time for food. So their need to be involved and to have an interaction with their food is still very apparent.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, even though the dog separated from the gray wolf about 13 to 17,000 years ago, 99% of their DNA is similar, and wolves and dogs can actually mate and deliver offspring and create a hybrid. And there were several people at the summit who had wolf dogs. So that shows you that how much similarity there is between them.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm pretty sure I see some wolf dogs, walking around on the street, like got some husky mix and whatever else. And they just look a little, they just look a little bit different. You're very cautious around them, or at least, especially people that have small dogs. I get a little nervous when I see, some of these small dogs around big dogs like that. Now, one of the things that really blew my mind was, one of the problems, of course, you talk about is the dog going in, wolfing down their food and all the problems that causes. And so the sort of modern day solution to that is the slow feeders. So can you talk about, first, for anyone who doesn't know what a slow feeder is, what it is, how it works, and then what the, very likely and maybe even obvious drawbacks of a slow feeder is?
Sure. Slow feeders are receptacles for food that have different types of material projectile. They sort of act as projectiles shooting out at the dog. Some are in a geometric shape, others are just individual projectiles, and the whole notion is you pour the food around in these, and then the dog has to sort of stick his nose in there to get the tongue close enough to scoop up the food. I spent a great deal of time looking at slow feeders, and the one problem I have with them is because they're projecting out, they are hitting into the dog's nose, which again is his most powerful sense, the way he sees the world. But he also has mucus glands in there. And when things are jabbing into there and food is going up there, they protect these glands for their smelling. And if they get dried out or injured, they lose the ability to see their world. So what I've discovered is that you can actually develop a negative relationship with food. The dogs will, because they get frustrated trying to go into it. Or it can even cause aggressive behavior. Some dogs learn to just flip it all together to get the food. I think that was one of the videos that I showed. But others will try to actually crack it open. So that's why, going back to the pet platter, as you can see, everything goes down instead of projecting outward. So we promote healthy eating instead of interfering with eating.
Right. Yeah, more like, with a carcass, there wouldn't necessarily be things projecting, but if there were bones and organs or whatever, they're much softer tissue than some of these. I don't know what these slow feeders are made of. I assume plastic and maybe even aluminum in some cases.
Right. And when they're eating from a carcass, remember, they can position themselves. And because trying to pull meat, the muscle meat is very difficult to get out. So they can only take so much in. It's sort of nature's way to prevent bloat. But they had more control of it. When you're eating from a slow feeder, you're forced to push your muzzle down in there to get the food. You don't have any option because there's no control over that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the video you showed, I think it was a bull terrier that he just said, I've had enough of this thing, and just picked it up, flipped it over, and all the little pieces of kibble spread out over the floor, and he basically made his own Mine Pet Platter right there on the floor. It's hilarious.
The competition's coming in.
Yeah.
Well, what I like when I talk to people about this, I say, how would you like to be sitting at a dinner table and somebody has a hard plastic spoon and they're jabbing it in your face while you're trying to get to your food? How would you feel about it?
Right.
I think the analogy is appropriate.
Yeah, or it's almost like there's this little labyrinth of it's a three. What if your plate was 3 dimensions and had, even if you're eating with a fork, if you had to go in there and dive in and scoop around and everything, how frustrating that would be. And then I guess when it's in a bowl, it's like the equivalent of wearing a football helmet, right? If you're limiting your peripheral vision and whatever else, so no one would eat like that. So it was
I think that this is a future video for you. Okay, we want to see you attempt to do that.
All right, yeah, we'll do a sequel, and I'll find a football helmet and put it on there. There was another video. So the last video I think you showed, which was a dog eating raw food. Actually, there was a cracked eggshell on there on the platter, and fascinating to watch. And all the things that we've talked about here, the dog sniffing around, etc., were in action there. So could you kind of paint the picture of that video, and then of course we'll get it and put it in the show notes.
Okay, great. Yeah, that was actually sent to us by a person who bought our platter, who is a raw feeder, and he had quarter sections of raw chicken with egg and other meats spread around. And the one thing I want to inform your listeners about, and I think this video showed it, is that when the dog is eating off the platter, he's eating over the food instead of into a bowl. And by eating over, they're picking up smaller pieces. There's no collecting wall like a bowl offers to shove all that food in at a single time. So the dog is acting, he could have been sitting at a table and picking up this hind quarter of chicken first, then that one, and then let's have a little raw egg on the side. Oh, and don't forget the shells as well. But because the food is out in front of him, he can sniff, he can move around. You show how relaxed the eating process can be. If all that were sitting in a bowl, he would just scarf that down and probably suffer serious digestive issues. In fact, I think about 15 to 20% of all vet calls today are related to digestion.
Wow.
So if we serve our food in a healthier way up front, we're going to save on vet bills later on.
Wow, fascinating. 15 to 20% related to digestion. Of course, the way and how, like your quote there, how you feed your dog is just as important as what you feed them. And so obviously there's a nutritional component there, and certainly some of these unknowns that come from bowl feeding could be a contributor as well. What's your thought on, I think you talked about this a little bit in your talk, was elevated feeding with or without the Mine Pet Platter, where I guess an owner will put a bowl on a chair, for example, that's a little bit elevated, and their dog will eat it from that way instead of having to bend over.
Tim, I applaud you for bringing this up. It's probably the single most contentious issue in the veterinary community. You can talk to different vets, different holistic vets, different pet parents, and everybody has a very different view about it. And the only thing I can say is I've done a lot of observational behavior, seeing how wolves eat from the carcass. And then I've also done a lot of observational behavior on how dogs eat from a bowl. And the one video that I showed was a glass bowl that a person was sort of holding up higher. And you could see how that dog was able to use the back end of the bowl as a collecting wall, and he used his mouth just to shove all that food up against it and inhale large quantities of air and food. And that's what bowls do. The pet is, dogs are very, very smart. When they want to get to their food, they'll figure out a way if they can really get it in there faster. So the one thing I want to alert people to, and I mentioned this before, you want the pet, the dog, eating over rather than into anything. When they can shove that food up against a backdrop, that's when they're going to take in more food and air. If you're eating over, like wolves do, when they ate into carcasses, they ate over the carcass. You're going to be pulling out smaller pieces. And I've had a number of customers contact me that they notice that when they serve from a high feeder, their dogs develop more gas before developing bloat. And so my best recommendation is to obviously consult your vet. However, look at how your pet is eating from a bowl. See if they're using the back of that bowl to shove more in. And if you do get a high feeder, if you notice more gas, that is an indication that something's going on in that stomach, because the bloat occurs when there's an expansion and it cuts off both ends of the stomach. So I would also recommend your viewers to go to the Produce study that actually found that with large and giant breeds, using a high feeder actually increased the probability of bloat. That's the one study I can point them to if they want to look at the evidence for themselves. But to me, nature knows best, and not having anything with sides and having it on the ground, because I never saw a wolf pick up a carcass and elevate it to eat it.
Put it on a tree stump.
Yeah, exactly. They always over.
So what are the potential pros, or what do people think the pros are of elevated food? Why do they do it?
That's a very good question. I think they felt that because they're so much larger, that it takes some, sort of more time to lean over and get the food. So elevating it was improving digestion. But when you watch a video eating out of an elevated feeder, it seems to accelerate the amount of air and food intake.
Interesting.
So yeah, I'm not quite sure how that was translated, but I think it's the single biggest divisive factor today, where people are very black and white on it. Mm-hmm. But I suggest your viewers do your homework and try things out. See what different options seem to improve. But the one thing that I said at the conference, and I'm not a veterinarian, I'm not claiming to be, but if you notice an increase in gas after you start using an elevated feeder, that's an indication and, you know, definitely go see your vet or start exploring the issue.
Got it. Okay. So my Pawcast teammate Krista has a question here about her dog Clover, which is, Clover always takes his food out of his bowl to eat. Is this related?
Yes, it is, Krista. How come she didn't tell me directly? She didn't ask me directly.
She wanted to save you some work and save it for the show. So we'll give her a pass.
It's absolutely related to that. And most times food dumping like that is an effort to either gain control over the food or to put it in a safer place where they can have complete view so nobody can come in and take it. So food dumping to me is basically a sign of anxiety with the pet. They're uncomfortable and there's a certain amount of tension that's operating. So their solution is, I'll get the food out of the bowl and I'll handle it my own way. So it's their instincts basically tapping in.
Got it. So I think we've covered, you know, most of the key parts of the Mine Pet Platter. And again, people can go to minepetplatter.com. They can order there. And of course, you're in 164 stores nationwide and growing also. I wanted to talk about a topic that we got onto just kind of as we close out here, from what you had, some of the common feedback that you'd got from people at the Raw and Natural Dog Show, not just on your product, but just in general. And it's, you know, gets down to being a pet parent and being exposed to all these new ways of thinking and approaches that people have never been exposed to before. And what was the phrase that someone said to you? And can you share a little bit more about your reaction to that?
Oh, sure. They felt like they were a bad pet parent because they didn't know about all these different options, not only in terms of what to feed, but how to feed. And I gave them a big hug and I said, never, ever think that you're a bad pet parent. The fact that you're interested in learning more is the most important thing. And if I could say one thing to all of your viewers, it would be, we're all in this together and we're all learning and educating one another. The reason why the Raw and Natural Summit is so important to me is that it's bringing people together, both professionals, just regular pet parents, people in the industry. We're all coming together for one common goal, and that's to improve the health and well-being of our pets. And together, we're going to educate one another, and this is how we succeed. So join forces with everybody. We're here to help one another. And I'm still learning too. Remember, my 14-pound Havanese let out the biggest belch for at least 5 years. So I'm up there, but every day I'm looking on how I can improve things.
Excellent. Yeah, I think those are words that we all need to hear. You know, we're all on a journey and exploring new approaches and seeing, you know, what are some of the potential downsides of the way things have always been done. And I always encourage my listeners and my subscribers and customers at Sunny's, our Golden Retriever brand, you need to, you know, you need to be able to think for yourself. And, you know, I think there's something really powerful that Dr. Richard Patton said at the event, which was, I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm here to tell you what to think about. And I thought that was just, you know, very powerful, having an open mind to it all and being very informed and, you know, being able to make your own decisions as long as it's, you know, one that you feel good about and informed of, and, you know, it's observation. So how does your pet respond?
Right. And I, you know, kudos to you. I'm so glad that you do the Thriving Dog Pawcast. It's a great way to get information out. And thank you for being part of our community, because you know what? This is really my family. And all of the pet parents out there are my family. And I think it's the best world of all.
Well, thank you for that. And I think, you know, everyone listening here feels the same. So glad that, you know, we are buddies and partners in this journey, as well as all our listeners here. So Thanks so much, Carol. Carol Smeja with Mine Pet Platter. You can get the product at minepetplatter.com and in select stores nationwide with a growing list of those coming.
Okay. Thanks so much, Tim. It's been a delight.
Same here. Thanks, Carol.